right. Hello and welcome back to the Content That Grows podcast. This week, we've got Kevin King on with us to discuss another fun kind of trending but potentially future impact topic. Nice to have you on, Kevin.
Great to be here. I'm back.
You're back. It's been a while. And we were talking about this in Slack, but it's episode number 50.
I know. I hope I don't underwhelm.
I think we both have that feeling. It's funny that Nate's worked so hard and been the face of this for all 49 other episodes.
Totally.
So we were jabbing him, but he was gracious enough to say that he thought we could handle it. So we'll do our best to remain entertaining and informative.
It's an honor.
Yeah. So the topic today is SGE, or Search Generative Experience. I just want to kind of like dig in, kind of figure out what the status is of this kind of search feature, if you will. Maybe talk a little bit about like whether we have any initial insights on content that's in there or how SEOs might leverage this. And then circle back on what we think it might mean for search and optimized content moving forward. But maybe to start, let's just kind of love to toss it over to you just to ask like, okay, what is this thing? What is SGE?
Yeah. Well, I think we're all still trying to figure it out. But ultimately what it literally is Google's attempt to use AI to summarize queries at the top of a search result, or it's bouncing around a little bit, but to quickly summarize a search result, utilizing their AI capabilities to make it easier and quicker to get an answer to a variety of queries. That's probably the most concise way I could put it, but there's a lot of nuance and tech to it, of course.
Yeah, I think my initial impression, just kind of pinging in and out of it, is that it's very much like a featured snippet that's just more dynamic and kind of cuts across multiple intents. It very much feels aligned with some of Google's talking points around like how they'd love to be able to introduce more diversity in the SERP, so you're not just seeing like the same title tags in the same approach to a topic, especially for like seed keywords and things like that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's going to be probably something I say a lot, maybe you say a lot, but yeah, the featured snippets comparison is really, I think, accurate. Just adding and improving the user experience. Improving might be a controversial way to put it because I know that there's a lot of opinions about it, but I think like generally that's what they are attempting to do is enhance the user experience of search. I know we'll get into like the hot takes or counter arguments to that, but like that's what it is. It's a user experience improvement and diversification of the SERPs. Those two things I think are the best way to put it.
Yeah. I think the two standout things that I'm enjoying about it and what it is like, I do like that it's a little long tail focused. Like as a user, I'm sort of like, oh, I can keep drilling down. I like that aspect. And then the other part is that like it does video and like e-commerce product input in there as well, which I think is fascinating, maybe a little terrifying for people in the e-com space. But yeah, I don't think it's a horrible experience. Not great, but not horrible.
No, not at all. I think there are queries that are better than others, obviously to your point, depending on the intent. But yeah, I think it's interesting to see how it's evolving too over the past few months. I think it's getting better. The comprehensiveness, I guess, of them, comprehensive and conciseness of it at the same time is kind of getting better. And they're incorporating more sources and citing more sources, which is better and a good experience, I think, overall. At the beginning, I think everyone was afraid that wasn't even going to happen. But yeah, I think it's still a lot to be seen from the quality of it. But yeah, I think it's been an interesting thing to watch develop. I know that seems pretty down the road, middle of the road, but and then the other thing too, the other thing I'll say about it too is from an experiential standpoint, the only thing which it'll come up probably a few times is that it's still slow. it takes a couple seconds. Actually, I know there's data. People have been that's one of the more interesting things that people have opinions about, and I think there are valid perspectives on it. But that's the only thing I'd say is probably not the best, is that it takes longer than, searching and then going through and scanning results and clicking. So that's something to double click on in a bit.
Nice. Yeah, so that's I think that's a perfect segue into like sort of like the squirreliness of this feature right now is probably why, like, I would hazard to guess most people listening to this have like run into the topic. But I think most people are kind of, no one's able to put their finger on it. Like, it changes all the time. So it just kind of wanted to like, maybe it'll help to just like walk through like how we've seen this thing evolve a little bit, and like what's some of those, like, I don't know, like what have we seen this thing do and change, and like why is that complicating the conversation of anyone claiming to know what this thing's going to do? Yeah.
Well, I think, and the first thing that comes to mind is ultimately that it doesn't appear all the time. I think that's something you and I have discussed this week, and but like, and as something that's like even more happening more recently, I think, and even personally for myself, it's just not appearing as much as I feel like it was at one given time over the past, I don't know, it's been out for about like, 6+ months. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a hard thing to zero in on. Obviously it's in a testing kind of mode, right? Or experiment, right? To use their language more so. Because it's an experiment, it's just rapidly changing. So it's really hard to zero in on like what we feel is going to stick and what's not going to stick. And so to be specific, like I mentioned it up top, like there weren't sources or any additional links cited initially. There's a lot more of that now, actually a lot. Mm-hmm. And they've enhanced that experience, even playing around more so with it in the past day, just even in preparation of this discussion. Just, there's within the links, you can expand those, and there's obviously rich content that gets pulled into that, like the imagery and all that. So it's gone from what was probably a really simple, hey, ask a question, here's the concise answer, to a more enriched experience, I guess, or enriched and dynamic experience than it was initially. All of the changes along the way, there's been a lot, but I think that probably sums it up best.
Yeah, I think the things that I've noticed, like just from playing with it, have been like it initially started, it was color coded, which was actually kind of useful as an SEO to start saying like, oh, there's a potential way that like Google's categorizing these, and like that will be useful. But now if you go like the search, it just blends right in. It's got that traditional white background. A lot of the, I think, like hunches around what this thing is going to do is like, what's Google willing to like allow its like interrupt its ads?
Right.
Correct. So like there's an element of like, are the ads going to show up in this? How do they keep this monetized? And then like this past week, it's the actual SGE response sat below the traditional 4 ads sitting at the top of a busy SERP. And then I jumped on this morning right before we were recording this and saw, well, nope, now it's above the ads. So it's like, this, as you were kind of saying, like this thing is just so dynamic right now in terms of, does it appear, doesn't it appear, where are they putting it, what's inside of it. And then as you mentioned, like I started grabbing queries from some of our client roadmaps just to see, like how is this impacting? And even over the last like month and a half or so, like it really feels like even those are changing regularly, like what they're willing to feature in there and how many of them even appear there.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like it's a moving target to understand exactly what it's going to service. One of the other things too, I think, which wasn't there initially, which happens sometimes, is that, how you can expand it to have more, like they're kind of hiding more information for like certain types of queries, right? And so like you have to actually prompt it. And also there are queries in which it doesn't, like you can actually, it doesn't surface that result automatically, and there's a prompt where you can ask for it to do that. So there's like all different ways that you can actually interact with it. It's not, which is a good thing to clarify. It's not just like, hey, sometimes it'll appear, sometimes it won't. It's actually more nuanced than that. Even though that's one of the actual outcomes, it might or might not appear. But then it might not appear, but then you might be able to actually make it appear.
Yeah. So then with all of that, I do want to focus on like what some people have been saying, like what we've been saying. And so maybe I'll just introduce a couple of these that are more like fear-mongery. And I just kind of want to get like maybe like your thoughts overall on like where you kind of fall on your temperament towards this thing. So obviously, like initially the first things I was seeing out of the gate were like, Google's going to tank its own, ad revenue. And like, what are they doing? Oh my goodness. And then I think over the last month, Microsoft sort of acknowledged like, hey, we haven't taken over any market share since we like put billions of dollars into this thing to help us with our own search and like compete. And so people are predicting like, oh, well, SGE is going to be this like watered down version of the thing that we see because there's not actually a ton of pressure on Google to like completely reinvent search and what they've been doing. So maybe they'll have more time. I think
that
go ahead.
That one is one of the more interesting ones, and I think it's actually probably one of the more level-headed perspectives on it, because I think that's true, right? Like there's a lot of other areas with AI which we're not going to dive into that I think are probably where they want to place their bets even more, even though the search experience is obviously ripe for this to be infused with AI. It's just, with the chat tools and all of that, like Bard versus ChatGPT and all the other ways they're integrating AI into their tool sets, like it seems like, there isn't as much pressure, or at least there isn't as much pressure anymore, versus like beginning of the year when Bing and all that was actually happening and announced, really, right? Like the temperature's gone down.
Yeah, and then the other part sort of has to do with like, I think people in our industry trying to figure out, well, what's our insurance plan if this hits the fan? And I like mostly am seeing people being like, forget top of the funnel, like we're going all middle and bottom because top is going to be all AI. And I think that sort of centers around other parts, which is like, are there other things we can optimize for, including Google's other kind of search products, if that's where we can categorize it, but like Google Discover being an example.
Google Discover, I think, is something I actually, I think we talked about this a couple weeks ago. I think that's like one of the things that in the next year people are going to be hot on. I'm seeing that a lot on Twitter. So I think that's a valid thing to say that might be one example of how people are going to have a backup plan or insurance policy against SGE if it becomes this, dominating force within the SERPs. But I don't particularly believe that that's what's going to happen. Just based on a lot of different perspectives. I mean, some of the stuff I've seen is really, it's interesting. It's the wide spectrum. There's people who believe it's going to steal all the clicks from, like you said, it's going to tank. They're going to tank their own ad revenue. There's the perspective that it's going to steal clicks from just the organic search, which I believe that will happen. I mean, that seems to be one of the most consistent predictions. It's just like everybody has a different percentage of clicks that they think it's going to steal from. Yeah. But it's, you got to have a number. And it's going to be across different industries and SERPs that'll be different. But the other thing is what's so funny is I'm seeing a lot of people say that it'll steal clicks, but then I think there's some people who are like, well, no, it might actually improve clicks in general, which, obviously there's validity to both perspectives. But the one thing that I saw in like doing more reading about this even recently was like Danny Sullivan had said in some article, we can link to it, but it was that in 2021, the stat was that Google has consistently every year increased traffic to the web through search every year since its inception, despite all of these other things that have come out. Like, right, there's featured snippets and all that. I'm filling in some of the blanks there with that, but if accurate and true, then that's interesting, right? Like, Google wants to improve the user experience, to what we were saying earlier, and I think that it might actually improve, or it'll change the way that we interact with search. Yes, it'll have an impact on clicks, but again, yet to be seen how. It could very well improve it in a variety of ways, especially if you know how to optimize it for, which is what we're talking about, like how people approach featured snippets, or how they did approach featured snippets, which is the other thing too. People are saying that it might replace featured snippets. So
also true. Yeah, it's kind of, it is an awkward experience when you land on, there's a number of them that have a featured snippet and the SGE pops up, and you're like, I don't think we need this.
Yeah, it's a lot to digest.
Yeah. I did think Aleda's post this week was like pretty even tempered. It was like a nice way to start to like think about percentages, and kind of a framework where she broke it down. Basically, like, there's duplicative SGE, where it's just like straight up the same thing. So if you unfurl that response, you're getting pretty much the same results, the same recommended articles inside of that. And so there's probably like less risk to you losing clicks. And then it set up kind of that medium kind of summarizing. So now it's like moving across them. Similarly, like, it'll be more impactful than a complete duplicate because there's some complementary features that it's offering you. But still fairly low medium risk to losing it. And then there's like what she referred to as like the accelerators, which is when it unfurls and it just starts like basically doing your business for you in some way, where it's offering like, and this is where I was seeing more of this in like e-commerce searches, where it's just like, hey, we'll take you right to this product, and whatever products fall into here have the best opportunity of getting sold.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, her take on all these types of things is always great. So I think that that's a good way to look at it. I don't want to like jump ahead, but I think that's like, there's a lot of good assessments of that, or at least initial ones that I think people should be absolutely taking into consideration, or at least like trying to look at it that way, so you can better analyze the types of content that you should be creating, the types of queries and topics you should be going after, and then like come up with strategies to map against that.
Yeah. So I guess say more about that. Like, what are your initial insights on like, how are SEOs, how are content marketers gonna use this thing moving forward? And is there a way to quote unquote use it, in terms of, does it offer us advantages, that kind of thing?
Yeah. I mean, I think the first thing, which we always recommend, is like, keep doing the fundamental things that we know always work. We've been doing this a long time. Like, if you lead with, strong content, topical depth, rich formatting, appropriate formatting, obviously strategic, when you know how to do that, be strategic about like what you're crafting there, but like all, schema markup where relevant and still applicable, like all the things that you should be doing, citing sources, all that is going to end up leading to a potential outcome for that, right? Similar to featured snippets. That's basically what I'm getting at. It's just like, we learned on that. We should take those learnings from featured snippets probably more than anything to try to capitalize on it. I think until a tool, which is naturally going to happen at some point, like an Ahrefs or SEMrush, SEMrush, however you pronounce it, is going to have something at some point. I don't know how quickly that'll happen, right? Like in Ahrefs, they give you great reporting on where featured snippets are, the types of featured snippets, all types of rich SERP results, right? So you can understand that better and optimize for it. I think we're probably a ways away from it, but that'll happen at some point. Until then, to my point earlier, I think you just have to you have to look at what you're going after from a topic standpoint and actually do a little bit more maybe manual assessment of what the SERPs look like across that and then map to that accordingly. I think one of the better approaches, because everyone's just kind of coming up with them now on their own, I think Ross Hudgens basically said, like, take your topics and search them across these, bucket them, and see where it's appearing, see where it's not, and start crafting a plan from there. And I think that's totally the probably level-headed and logical way to approach it, because you need to understand where these opportunities are, and then try your best to communicate upwards about how you're going to, either mitigate the impact of it or actually capitalize on what the benefits of it might be, right?
Yeah. So I started doing that for our own content, just to like, nice. I don't know, it's kind of the old school manual way of just being like, let's see what it generates, and let's look at the long tails, and like, let's see what this whole thing is about. And which, like, anyone listening to this can do pretty effectively. Like, if you have a piece of content that is ranking very well, just log into whatever account that like you can get beta access to SGE. Search that keyword and like see if you fall into the SGE experience, and like likely you will, if your piece of content ranks. So in that way, it feels very much just based on like looking at the content we've ranked well and that appears in SGE. It's very much like optimizing for a featured snippet. Like, do you have parts of your content that match the intent of this one line that's in their summary? Then I bet you can get your content in that drop down within the summary.
Yeah.
And that it doesn't feel like it's shaking me to my core at like how I do SEO, or it just feels very much like, oh, I see this being a tool. And then in addition to seeing the content that I get into the SGE tool, like it's now offering me all of the data around what other users are searching in the long tail related to this topic.
Yeah.
So now you can like, even if you don't see that long tail inside of Ahrefs or SEMrush, like you now have access to like hints for other queries you can either optimize that article for, or create other content around.
Totally. Having an optimistic outlook like that is the way to go with any of this stuff. I mean, like you mentioned up top, there's a lot of these, perspectives that just kind of create fear and reactive tactics and anxiety about like what it's going to do. And I mean, if that's the perspective you have, then ultimately you might be doing something just wrong in general, because like you should be able to, with the tool set that you have and we have at our disposal, to capitalize on these things or use them as things that can inform strategy even more. And like it's an early one, so you just got to keep an eye on it. Like all these things we're talking about are obviously speculative. Some of these tips are probably really good ways to approach it right now, because you shouldn't ignore it. You got to have a plan. Like if like us, or if you're in-house and you have like a boss or a manager or a CMO or anybody in marketing that's like, what are we doing about this? Like all of this is a good way to go, like, this is how we're thinking about it. Because it can't just be like, I don't know, search is we're going to lose clicks. We're going to lose clicks. Like it's better to have a perspective and answer on it. So yeah. I think that makes a ton of sense.
I think unfortunately, this is sort of just a tangent on a little bit of what you said there. Like the fear-mongering aspect that I'm seeing and catching it comes from the SEO community, but it's like, it's a tactic, right? Like I see people paying for spots in newsletters and paying for like all these things so that they can basically say like, the sky is falling and I have the answer, so follow me out. And it's like, that's pretty annoying, just like in general. I get it. I understand it's a tactic. It's sort of straight out of like the influencer playbook, but
absolutely.
It bothers me to like, that it's like our own industry tries to like basically like shame you out of other. I'm smart. I'll help you. I'm the only way out because like this, it's just crumbling.
Yeah. And that happens with everything. It's happened this whole year with all the different things that have happened. We can point to so many different things, including the multiple helpful content updates, the other core algorithm updates. Like they're just, everyone's going to clamor to have the answer right away, and also the perspective that makes you want to, trust what they have to offer. And ultimately, I think when you get under the hood, it's just still going to be a lot of the same. Nothing truly innovative because it's all new, which is always the thing to keep in mind. When something's so new, how can anybody have that much actual true experience to be an expert on it?
Yeah, I agree. Well, I think that actually sums everything up pretty nicely. So essentially what we've learned today is like this thing's still in motion. It's worth taking the time to kind of learn, play with it. It's probably, it's worth just like having a perspective on this thing that is like, this will probably be a future tool, a thing that we can use to better understand and help either the company you work for or your clients kind of get the spots if this thing's going to be launched. We don't know when it's going to be launched. I've seen some speculation that it's probably going to be next year, just given an attempt to not create too much volatility going into the holiday seasons and people taking time off. And so with that, I guess that'll wrap it up. We have a webinar coming up next week, Thursday. Well, I guess if you're listening to this in 2 days. So November 16th, it'll be 11 a.m. Central Time, 12 p.m. Eastern Time. We're going to go over what's working for our clients and generally the SaaS industry at large when it comes to SEO, and uncover 8 ways that you can level up your 2024 plans.
Super relevant to this conversation.
Exactly. So with that, thanks for coming on and talking, Kevin, and we'll see you again hopefully soon.
Yeah, my pleasure. Looking forward to it.